My father ripped a handwritten poem out of my 7-year-old adopted daughter's hands at his 65th birthday party in front of 40 relatives and said, "You'll never be part of this family. I wish they'd kept you where they found you." My little girl stood there with her arms still stretched out, fingers still curled around air where the paper used to be, and the sound that came out of her wasn't crying. It was something worse. It was the sound a child makes when they realize that love has conditions they will never meet. 40 adults in that room, 40 forks, 40 sets of eyes that suddenly discovered something urgent about the tablecloth, the ceiling, the bottom of a wine glass. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My sister Lorraine looked at her lap like it contained instructions for how to be invisible. My mother stirred her coffee in a cup that was already empty, and my father sat back in his chair like he'd just delivered a weather report and was waiting for someone to thank him for the forecast. So I stood up. I looked him in his face and I said something so quiet that people leaned forward to hear it, and when they heard it, they wished they hadn't. Then I picked up my daughter, walked out the front door, and I never walked back through it. But here's what nobody in that room knew. What I said to my father wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And what happened over the next 6 months cost that man his house, his family, his reputation, and every single comfort he'd built on my back over 15 years of silence. My name is Margaret. I was 32 years old when this happened. I'm 78 now, and I can still feel the weight of that little girl's body against my chest as I carried her to the car, her fingers gripping my collar so tight the fabric left a mark on my neck that lasted 2 days. The mark faded. The memory didn't, but I need to take you back before I take you forward, because this story doesn't start at a birthday party. It starts in a house where I learned very early that love wasn't something you received. It was something you earned, and some people were born with a head start, and some people, well, some people were born to be useful. I grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, the kind of place where everybody knows your business but nobody knows your pain. My father, Gerald, worked at a machine shop and came home every evening smelling like metal shavings and authority. He was a big man, not tall big, but presence big, the kind of man who filled a room just by breathing in it. When Gerald spoke, you listened, not because what he said was wise, but because the alternative was worse. My mother, Dolly, was the opposite. Small, quiet, always smoothing things over like she was ironing wrinkles out of air. She made casseroles and kept her head down and spent her entire marriage translating Gerald's cruelty into something the rest of us could swallow. He didn't mean it like that. He's just tired. You know how your father gets. I heard those sentences so many times they started to sound like a lullaby, the kind that puts you to sleep so you stop noticing the fire. My sister Lorraine was born 3 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, the math changed. Lorraine was the baby. Lorraine was delicate. Lorraine needed things. I was the older one, which in my father's vocabulary meant I was the one who handled things so he didn't have to. When I was 9 and Lorraine was 6, our mother got sick. Not the kind of sick where you stay in bed for a week and then come back to normal. The kind where the house starts smelling like medicine and adults start having conversations in the kitchen with the door closed and you learn to read fear on faces that are trying very hard to look calm. Dolly recovered eventually, but something in the house shifted during those months, like the foundation had cracked and everybody just kept walking on it, pretending the floor was still level. Gerald decided that I was the backup mother, not Lorraine. Lorraine was too young, too sensitive, too much like Dolly. Margaret can handle it, he'd say, like it was a compliment. Margaret is strong. Do you know what strong means when you're 9 years old and your father says it? It means nobody is coming to help you. It means you are the help. I did the laundry. I packed lunches. I heated soup on a stove I had to stand on a step stool to reach. I brushed Lorraine's hair and tied her shoes and helped her with math homework that I hadn't even learned yet myself, because I was only 1 grade ahead and the teacher hadn't gotten to fractions. When I complained, and I did complain because I was a child and children are supposed to complain when the world asks too much of them, my father would sigh like I'd personally insulted gravity. Don't add to my plate, Margaret. Be mature. Be helpful. You want your mother to worry? That was the weapon, my mother's health. Every time I wanted to be a kid, he'd wave Dolly's illness like a flag, and I'd retreat because I didn't want to be the reason she got worse. I didn't want to be the reason for anything bad. So I became the reason for everything manageable instead. Now, if you're listening to this and you grew up in a house like mine, where one child carried the weight and the other child carried nothing and the adults called it balance, I want you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, not for me, for the version of yourself that never got to say this out loud, because every story on this channel is for the ones who were told to be strong when they should have been told they were loved. And while you're there, drop a comment and tell me which one you were, the strong one or the protected one. I want to know. I want to hear from you. Lorraine grew up exactly the way you'd expect a protected child to grow up. Confident, comfortable, certain that the world would catch her because it always had. She married a man named Douglas at 24. Douglas sold cars at a dealership and had the kind of smile that made you check your wallet afterward. They had two kids, a boy named Thomas, who was 8, and a girl named Bridget, who was 6. And they lived 20 minutes from my parents' house in a neighborhood with sidewalks and block parties, and the kind of certainty that comes from never having to wonder if you belong. I took a different road, obviously. I worked at a textile factory after high school because college wasn't something Gerald believed in for daughters. Why waste the money? He said that without blinking, like he was stating a mathematical fact. You'll get married. You'll have kids. What do you need a degree for? I didn't argue because arguing with Gerald was like arguing with weather. You could shout at the rain all you wanted. You were still going to get wet. The factory paid enough to get a small apartment, a used car with a heater that worked when it felt like it, and a life that was mine even if it was small. And then I met William. William Cole walked into my life sideways, the way all the best things do when you've stopped expecting them. He was a merchant navy engineer, which meant he spent months at sea on cargo ships and came home with salt in his hair and stories about ports I couldn't pronounce, and a steadiness that made me feel like the ground had stopped shaking for the first time in my life. William was not flashy. He didn't fill rooms the way my father did. He entered them quietly and left them better. He listened like listening was a skill he trained for. He asked questions and then waited for the actual answer instead of planning his next sentence while you were still talking. We got married in 1977. Small ceremony. My mother came and cried quietly into a tissue. My father came and shook William's hand like he was closing a business deal. The rain came late and left early. It was perfect because it was ours. We tried for children. Years of trying. Doctor visits in cold offices with diagrams on the walls and words like unlikely and options and alternative paths. William was at sea for most of it, which meant I sat in those waiting rooms alone, holding pamphlets about procedures I couldn't afford and timelines I couldn't control. Every month was a small funeral for a hope I couldn't bury because it kept coming back. And every holiday at my parents' house, Lorraine's kids would run through the living room like evidence of everything I couldn't produce, and my father would look at me with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite disappointment, but lived in the neighborhood between them. One Christmas, Gerald pulled me aside in the kitchen while Dolly was serving pie. He leaned against the counter and said, quiet enough that only I could hear, some women just aren't meant for it, Margaret. Maybe God's telling you something. I stared at him and I felt something inside me that I didn't have a name for yet. Later, I'd learn the name. It's called the moment you stop trying to earn love from someone who's charging you rent for it. But at the time, I just swallowed and said nothing because that's what I'd been trained to do. Swallow, smile, Kerry. William came home in the spring of 1982 for a 3-month shore leave. We sat on our porch one evening with the crickets going and the sky turning that color it turns when the day is giving up, but trying to look beautiful about it. He reached over and took my hand, and he said, Maggie, I've been thinking. What if we adopt? He said it simply, like it was a door, not a debate. I looked at him and I realized that the thing I'd been grieving wasn't a baby. It was the permission to become a mother in a way that didn't require my body to cooperate. William gave me that permission in one sentence on a porch in Pennsylvania, and I have never loved another human being more than I loved him in that exact moment. Except one, and I hadn't met her yet. I met Ruby in a county office that smelled like floor wax and nervous energy. She was sitting on a plastic chair that was too big for her, legs dangling, wearing a dress that someone had ironed carefully but that didn't quite fit, like the clothes were trying harder than the circumstances. She had dark hair cut straight across her forehead and eyes that tracked everything in the room the way a bird tracks movement, not out of curiosity but out of survival. In her lap was a stuffed rabbit. One ear was missing. She held it with both hands like she was protecting it from something only she could see. The caseworker introduced me. Ruby didn't smile. She didn't wave. She looked at me the way you look at a door when you've been told it leads somewhere safe, but you've been lied to before. I knelt down because I didn't want to be taller than her for this. Hi, I said. I'm Margaret. She looked at the rabbit instead of at me. Do you have pets? She asked. I blinked. Not right now. She nodded once, very serious. I like animals better than people. They don't change their minds. That sentence, spoken by a 7-year-old in a county office in 1982, went into my chest and stayed there. It's still there. 46 years later, it's still there. She'd been in 3 foster homes in 2 years. The details in her file were the kind you read with your jaw tight and your hands curled, because the words are clinical, but the reality behind them is anything but. She was not a difficult child. She was a surviving child. And the world kept confusing the two. The first night Ruby stayed with us, she didn't sleep in the bed. I found her in the morning curled up on the floor beside it, the rabbit tucked under her chin, her shoes still on. She'd lined her backpack up against the wall, next to the door, zipped tight, ready to go. She wasn't unpacking because she didn't believe she was staying. The second night, she asked me if she was allowed to use the bathroom at night, or if she had to wait until morning. The third night, she stood in the kitchen doorway watching me cook and whispered, "Can I help?" Not because she wanted to, because she thought usefulness was the price of staying. I recognized that instinct. I recognized it because it was mine. My father had installed it in me at age 9, and here it was, installed in a 7-year-old by a world that had done the same math. Be helpful or be gone. I said, you can help if you want to, but you can also just sit and watch. You don't have to earn dinner. She looked at me like I'd spoken another language. Then she sat down at the table and watched me chop onions, and she didn't say a word for 20 minutes. But she stayed. That was the beginning. By month 3, Ruby was calling me Mum. Not consistently, not confidently. It would slip out like a bird escaping a cage, and then she'd freeze and look at me to see if she'd broken a rule. Every time, I'd just keep doing whatever I was doing and say, yep, that's me. No big reaction, no fanfare, just confirmation, because Ruby didn't need a celebration. She needed certainty. By month 5, she was arguing with me about bedtime, which was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Because children only argue when they feel safe enough to push back. She pushed back. I let her. Then I won, because I'm the mother, and bedtime is non-negotiable. But the point is, she fought, and fighting meant trusting, and trusting meant she was finally building the thing she'd never had before, a floor that didn't move. Then month 6 arrived, and so did my father's 65th birthday. I should have known better. That's what I tell myself now, at 78, sitting in this chair with enough hindsight to fill a library. I should have known that bringing Ruby into Gerald's house was like bringing a candle into a room full of gasoline and hoping nobody would strike a match. But I was 32, and I still had the disease. The one where you keep returning to the person who hurt you because some stupid, stubborn part of your heart keeps whispering, maybe this time, maybe he'll see her, maybe he'll see her. When I told Gerald we were adopting, he hadn't taken it well. That's a polite way of saying he'd said things that would make your skin crawl, but I'm going to tell you exactly what he said, because you deserve the truth, and so does Ruby. He called me on the phone and said, "Why would you do that? You don't know where that kid comes from. You don't know what's in her blood." And when I told him Ruby's name and that she was 7, he said, "So someone else didn't want her, and you think you're going to do better?" William was on a ship somewhere in the Atlantic, and I was standing in my kitchen holding the phone with both hands because one hand wasn't steady enough. I said, "She's a child, Dad. She needs a home." He said, "She's not yours. She'll never be yours. Blood is blood." Then he said the thing that Gerald always said when he wanted to end a conversation by winning it. "Don't expect me to pretend." I hung up. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying over Gerald's opinions somewhere around the age of 14 when I realized his opinions weren't about truth, they were about territory. But I still invited him to his own birthday party. I still brought Ruby. I still let that little girl spend 3 nights at our kitchen table writing a poem for a man who'd already decided she was worthless. Because I thought maybe the poem would do what I never could. Maybe her words would crack something open in him that mine couldn't reach. I was wrong. and Ruby paid for it. The party was at Gerald's house. Lorraine had organized it because organizing things for Gerald was Lorraine's love language and also her job, since Gerald had assigned it to her, which is the only job he ever assigned Lorraine, the fun ones. The house was decorated with silver and blue balloons. There was a banner that said, Happy 65th Gerald in Lorraine's handwriting. The cake was from the Good Bakery, the one Lorraine always used because presentation mattered in that family more than substance. Ruby was wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, yellow with white flowers. She'd brushed her own hair that morning and asked me to check if it was straight. She'd tucked the poem into a card she'd made from construction paper and decorated with crayon drawings of stars and a cake, and what I think was supposed to be a dog but might have been a horse. In the car, she held the card on her lap with both hands and said, Mom, do you think he'll put it on the fridge? I said, I think he'll love it. That's the lie I told my daughter, and it's the lie I'll regret until the day I close my eyes for good. We walked in. The house was loud with relatives, most of whom I saw once a year and spoke to twice. Lorraine's kids, Thomas and Bridget, were already in the living room, performing the roles they'd been assigned since birth. Thomas was showing Gerald a drawing. Bridget was on Gerald's knee, getting her hair ruffled. Gerald looked at them like they were proof that he'd done something right with his life, which was ironic because he hadn't raised them. Lorraine had, and Lorraine had been raised by me. Ruby stood beside me in the doorway, one hand gripping my skirt, the other holding the card. She was scanning the room the way she always scanned rooms, mapping the exits, reading the faces, calculating the threat level. My mother came over and said hello to Ruby in the voice she used for strangers, polite but distant, like she was complimenting a neighbor's garden instead of greeting her granddaughter. Lorraine waved from across the room without crossing it. Douglas nodded at me and went back to his beer. Gerald saw us, saw Ruby, and gave a nod so small it barely qualified as facial movement. Hello, he said. Like we were delivering a package, Ruby's grip tightened on my skirt. I put my hand on her shoulder and whispered, You're okay. We're right here. She whispered back. He didn't smile. Kids notice everything. Adults forget that, and then they wonder why children don't trust them. The party moved to the gift-giving phase, which in Gerald's house was less of a celebration and more of a performance review. Thomas handed Gerald a gift bag with tissue papers sticking out the top. Gerald made a big show of pulling out a fishing lure and a card. That's my boy, he boomed. Real fisherman knows what Grandpa likes. He clapped Thomas on the back with a hand that was all warmth, all pride. Bridget gave him a picture frame with her school photo in it. Gerald held it up like it was a trophy. Beautiful, he said. This goes right on the mantel. He kissed her forehead. 2 grandchildren. 2 perfect moments. I watched Ruby watch all of it. She was taking notes. She was studying what love looked like in this family, not knowing that the version on display wasn't available to her. When the other gifts were done, Ruby stepped forward. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. She held out the card with both hands, arms fully extended, like she was offering something sacred. I wrote something, she said, and her voice was so small it barely reached the second row of relatives. She cleared her throat and read the poem she'd spent 3 nights perfecting. Dear Grandpa, you are 65. That is a lot of years. I know you like fishing and pancakes in your big brown chair. I didn't have a grandpa before, but now I do. Thank you for letting me be in your family. I love you very much. Ruby. Now I need to stop here for a second, because if you have a heart, and I know you do because you're still watching, you understand what that poem cost her. That wasn't words on paper. That was a child building a bridge with her bare hands over a canyon she'd been falling into her whole life. Every line was a risk, every word was an offering. She was giving Gerald the thing she wanted most in the world, a family, and asking him to give it back. He didn't give it back. Gerald's face changed while she read. Not softened. Changed. The way a sky changes before a storm. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flat. His fingers gripped the armrest of his chair, and by the time Ruby finished and held out the card, his hand shot out and snatched it like he was confiscating something illegal. He looked at the card for 1 second, then he looked at Ruby, and he said in a voice loud enough for every person in that room to hear, You'll never be part of this family. I wish they'd kept you where they found you. Then he tossed the card onto the coffee table. It slid across the surface and stopped against a bowl of mixed nuts. Ruby's arms were still out, her fingers were still curled. Her mouth opened and then her face collapsed inward, folding up like a paper doll that someone had crushed in their fist. The sound she made wasn't crying, it was gasping, air going in and nothing coming out. Her body didn't know how to process what had just happened because her body was 7 years old and it had already processed more rejection than most adults experience in a lifetime. Nobody moved. Lorraine stared at her shoes. Douglas inspected his beer bottle like it contained the answers to the universe. My mother stirred her coffee. The spoon went around and around and around, and the coffee was already cold. And she'd already added the sugar 10 minutes ago, but she stirred it because stirring meant she didn't have to look up. Thomas and Bridget froze on the couch like statues. An aunt I barely knew cleared her throat. An uncle coughed. 40 people in that room, and not a single one of them opened their mouth. So I opened mine. I was beside Ruby before I knew I was moving. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around her, and her body was vibrating, not shaking, vibrating, like something inside her was trying to come apart at the molecular level. She pressed her face into my neck and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. I'll make a better one. I'm sorry." That sentence, "I'll fix it," spoken by a 7-year-old who believed that the poem was the problem, that she was the problem, that if she could just get the words right, the adults would stop being cruel. That sentence rewired something inside me permanently. I felt the old Margaret, the one who swallowed and smoothed and carried. I felt her die, right there on Gerald's living room carpet, between the coffee table and the recliner. She just stopped existing. And the woman who stood up in her place was someone I'd never met before, but I liked her immediately. I stood up with Ruby pressed against me. I looked at my father. The room was absolutely silent. I could hear the clock on the wall. I could hear Bridget breathing through her mouth. I could hear my mother's spoon still going around in that empty cup. I said, "Since everyone in this room loves honesty so much, let me be honest. That child just gave you the only thing she has, her words, her heart, her hope, and you threw it on the table next to the mixed nuts. So here's my honesty, Dad. You just lost your daughter. And you did it in front of everyone, so there won't be any confusion about why." The room didn't breathe. Gerald's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Lorraine looked up from her lap for the first time, eyes wide. My mother's spoon finally stopped. I picked up Ruby's card from the coffee table. I tucked it into my purse. I picked up Ruby's jacket from the back of a chair. I took my daughter's hand, and I walked out. Nobody followed us. The door closed behind me, and I heard the silence break into whispers, the kind of whispers that happen when people are trying to figure out who to blame so they don't have to blame themselves. Ruby was silent in the car. Not the kind of silent where a child is calming down. The kind where a child is deciding something about the world, something permanent, something that will live in their bones for decades. I watched her in the rearview mirror. She was sitting with her feet tucked under her, making herself small. Her shoes were neatly together. Her hands were folded. She was doing the thing she always did when she felt unsafe. Becoming invisible. "Mum," she said. And the word was so quiet, it almost wasn't there. "Am I not real family?" My hands gripped the steering wheel. I kept my voice level even though my throat was full of broken glass. "You are real. You are my family. You are staying forever." She looked at me in the mirror. "Do you promise?" "I promise." She was quiet for another minute. Then she said, "Can we get ice cream?" 7 years old, heart shattered. And she wanted ice cream. 7 years old, heart shattered. And she wanted ice cream. Children are the bravest people on this planet, and if you disagree, you haven't been paying attention. We got ice cream. She got strawberry with sprinkles. I got nothing because my stomach was made of cement. We sat in the parking lot of the ice cream shop, and she ate her cone, and I watched her, and I made a decision that had been forming since the moment I heard her say, "I'll fix it." I was done fixing things for people who kept breaking them. Gerald was about to find out what his life looked like without the daughter he'd been using as a load-bearing wall for 32 years. And here's where I need you to understand something that nobody in my family knew because I'd kept it that quiet for that long. For the past 7 years, since Gerald retired early and his pension didn't stretch as far as his pride, I had been sending him $600 every single month. $600 every single month. $600 every month. Like clockwork, like rent, like penance for some crime I'd never committed but had been sentenced for anyway. It started when he called me one night and said, "Margaret, I'm short this month. Don't tell your mother. Don't tell Lorraine. She's got her own problems." His voice had that tone, the one he used when he was pretending to be vulnerable so you do what he wanted without him having to actually ask. I set up the payment the next morning. I didn't tell William because William was at sea and because telling William would have meant admitting out loud that my father saw me as an ATM with a heartbeat. Over 7 years, that's $5,400. $50,400. I worked overtime at the factory. I skipped things. I said no to myself over and over so I could say yes to a man who said my daughter wasn't real. That night, after Ruby fell asleep with strawberry ice cream still on her chin and the stuffed rabbit tucked under both arms, I sat at the kitchen table and I opened the checkbook. The payment was due in 4 days. I looked at the line where I'd written Gerald's name every month for 7 years, and I crossed it out. Not dramatically, not with tears. I just drew a single line to his name and closed the book. Then I opened a new page and wrote Ruby's name instead. Starting that month, the $600 went into a savings account for my daughter's future. Gerald's comfort was no longer my responsibility, and when he found out, which he would, because Gerald always noticed when the money stopped, even if he never noticed when it started, well, that was going to be a conversation I was ready for. And if you're still watching, which I know you are because this story isn't done and you can feel it, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you would have done at that birthday party. Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have caused a scene? Would you have set the cake on fire? Because I went with the option that didn't involve arson, and I'm still not sure I made the right call. And while you're down there, hit that like button. Not for the algorithm, for Ruby. For every kid who ever stood in a room full of adults and realized that none of them were going to help. The first week was quiet. Eerily quiet. Nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody showed up. It was like the family had decided that if they ignored what happened, it would unhappen, like reality was a suggestion they could decline. Then Sunday came. The day that, in my family, meant I drove to Gerald's house and cooked dinner and watched his grandchildren while he sat in his recliner accepting service like a king who'd forgotten that his kingdom was made of one tired woman's labor. Lorraine called at 8 in the morning. Her voice was bright and brisk, the voice of a woman who has decided that a crisis is actually a misunderstanding and that her job is to correct it. "Kate," she said, and I let the wrong name slide because Lorraine always called me Kate when she wanted me to be smaller. "Dad's expecting everyone at noon. Let's just move past Saturday." That sentence, "let's just move past Saturday," as if my daughter being told she should have stayed in whatever institution discarded her, was a scheduling complaint. I said, "We won't be coming." The brightness in Lorraine's voice flickered. "What do you mean?" "I mean we won't be coming today or any Sunday." Lorraine exhaled like I was being exhausting, which is the sound I've heard from my family my entire life. The sound of a woman who has never carried anything heavy being annoyed by the woman who carries everything. "Margaret," she said, switching to my real name like that was a lever she could pull. "Dad said something stupid. He's 65. He's old-fashioned. You can't punish him forever." "I'm not punishing him," I said. "I'm protecting my daughter." She scoffed. "Protecting her from what? Words?" Then she lowered her voice the way people do when they're about to say the thing they actually think. "And honestly, Margaret, you have to admit it's a lot. You show up with this child nobody's met and expect everyone to just, I cut her off. She's been here 6 months, Lorraine. You've met her 4 times." She paused. "Well, it's still new, and Dad needs time." "He doesn't get time," I said. "He gets a choice. Treat my daughter like family or lose his." There was a longer pause. Then Lorraine's voice went cold. "You're going to regret this." "I've regretted a lot of things," I said. "This won't be one of them." I hung up. I made pancakes. Ruby came to the kitchen in her pajamas and said, "Can I put syrup on mine?" And I said, "You can put whatever you want on yours, because that's what freedom sounds like in a house where a child is finally safe." Gerald didn't call about the birthday. Gerald called about the money. It took exactly 11 days. The payment didn't clear. The bank notified him. And Gerald called me with the tone of a man who had been inconvenienced by the help. Margaret, the payment didn't go through. Fix it by Friday. No hello. No how's Ruby. No mention of the party, the poem, the words he said that made a 7-year-old believe she deserved to be returned like a broken product. Just fix it. Like I was a machine and the machine had malfunctioned. I said, I cancelled the payment. I won't be sending money anymore. The silence on the line was so thick, I could hear him breathing through his nose. He finally spoke. After everything I've done for you? I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said, What have you done for me, Dad, specifically? He sputtered. I raised you. I kept a roof over your head. I never missed a day of work. I fed you. I clothed you. You fed me. I repeated. You clothed you. You clothed you. You clothed me. That's not love, Dad. That's the legal minimum. He didn't have a response to that because the truth doesn't need a rebuttal. It just needs air. Then he said the thing that told me exactly what this was about. You owe me, he said, voice dropping into that register he used when he wanted you to feel afraid. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. The hand isn't feeding me, I said. It hasn't in 20 years. I've been feeding you. $600 a month for 7 years. You took $50,000 from me while telling my daughter she doesn't belong in your family. You didn't call to apologize. You called because the check bounced. He started to respond. I hung up because I'd already heard everything that man had to say, and he'd been saying the same thing my entire life in different words. You exist to serve me. And the moment you stop, I'll remind you why you shouldn't. 3 weeks later, the thing happened that I haven't been able to talk about without my blood pressure going up even now. 46 years later, sitting in this recliner with tea that's getting cold and a heart that still races when I remember it. I pulled into the pickup line at Ruby's school, the way I did every afternoon. 2:45, same spot, same routine. Ruby liked routine. Ruby liked routine. Routine meant safe. Routine meant I'm coming back. I waited. The bell rang. Kids poured out. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. No Ruby. I parked the car and walked to the front office, keeping my face calm because Ruby's school knew me, and I knew the secretaries, and I didn't want to be the hysterical mother who couldn't find her kid for 10 minutes. The secretary smiled at me. Oh, Ruby was picked up early, she said. Your father came in about 20 minutes ago. My vision narrowed. My father? She nodded, cheerful. He's on the approved list. She showed me the sign-out sheet. Gerald's handwriting, Gerald's signature, a timestamp that meant my daughter had been gone for 20 minutes with a man who told her she should have been kept in an orphanage. I said, remove him from the list right now. He is never to pick up my child again. Something in my voice must have communicated the severity, because the secretary stopped smiling and started clicking at her keyboard immediately. I drove to Gerald's house faster than I should have. My hands weren't shaking. They were still. Completely still. That's how I knew I was past angry. Angry shakes. What I was feeling was something colder, something older, something that had teeth. Lorraine's car was in the driveway. Of course it was. I didn't knock. I opened the door. Lorraine appeared in the hallway like a sentinel. Margaret, what are you? I walked past her. Gerald was in the living room. Ruby was on the floor, sitting straight, hands in her lap, not touching anything, not playing, just existing in the smallest way possible. Gerald was on the couch, rolling a rubber ball toward her, performing grandfatherhood, like a man who'd read about it in a pamphlet. Come on, sweetheart, he was saying. Grandpa's just playing. Ruby didn't touch the ball. She didn't look at him. Her eyes found me the second I entered the room, and she stood so fast she knocked the ball sideways. She crossed the room and grabbed my hand and pressed her face into my hip and held on like I was the last solid thing in a world that kept melting. I looked at Gerald. He had the audacity to look pleasant. Kate, he started. It's Margaret, I said, and you took my daughter from her school without my permission. His expression shifted into the one he always used when he wanted to seem reasonable while being monstrous. I'm making an effort, he said. You said treat her like family. I'm treating her like family. He gestured at the ball, at the carpet, at the scene he'd staged, like a Christmas card for a family that didn't exist. I thought we could start fresh, he added. I decided it was time. You decided, I said. You decided to take a child from school without telling her mother. You don't get to decide that. Lorraine stepped in. Margaret, he's trying. I turned to her. He signed her out using an approval I forgot to remove. That's not trying, Lorraine. That's taking. Gerald stood up. Now hold on, he started, voice rising. Don't twist this. I came to get her because I wanted to show you I'm ready to be her grandfather. Ready, I repeated. You told her 3 weeks ago that she should have stayed in an orphanage. And now you want to play ball on the carpet. He looked at me, and for 1 second the mask slipped and I saw what was underneath. Not love, not remorse, calculation. He wasn't there for Ruby. He was there because I'd turned off the money, and this was his way of pulling the leash. Be a good granddaughter. Bring the kid. Bring the check. His eyes flicked to Ruby and back to me, and he said almost warmly, Let's be a family again, Margaret. The $600, we can sort that out. Family takes care of family. There it was. The transaction. The reveal. He picked up my daughter from school and driven her to his house and staged a scene with a rubber ball, not because he loved her, but because he wanted his money back, and she was the leverage. I looked at him and I said very quietly, You just told me everything I needed to know. I took Ruby's backpack from the chair. I took her jacket. I held her hand. And I walked out of that house for the last time. Behind me, Gerald called my name like it was a command. It wasn't anymore. In the car, Ruby said, He doesn't really want to be my grandpa, does he? No, baby, he doesn't. She nodded, small and serious. That's okay. I have you. I drove home with tears running down my face and my daughter in the back seat, holding a one-eared rabbit and a certainty that she was loved, and that was the day I filed a formal complaint with the school, changed every emergency contact, removed Gerald from every document, and began the process of making sure he could never get near Ruby again. I also called a lawyer. Not for custody. Gerald had no legal claim. I called because I wanted to know my rights, Ruby's rights, and what protection looked like when family was the threat. William came home 2 months later. He'd resigned his position at sea, took a job at a shipyard 30 minutes from our house. Less money, more presents. He walked through the door and Ruby ran at him so hard she nearly knocked him over. He picked her up and she said, Are you staying? He said, I'm staying. She said, Promise. He said, Promise. Then she whispered something in his ear that I didn't hear until he told me that night after she was asleep. She'd said, Mom kept me. Can you keep me too? The adoption was finalized 4 months later. A judge in a small courtroom looked at Ruby and asked her if she understood what today meant. Ruby nodded and said, It means nobody can give me back. The judge smiled and the stamp hit the paper, and Ruby came Ruby Cole. Legally, permanently, irreversibly. She turned to me and said, Mom, my name has your name in it now. I said, It always did, sweetheart. We just made it official. William put his arm around both of us, and the courtroom smelled like old wood and new beginnings. And Ruby held up the stuffed rabbit so it could see the judge, too. I never spoke to Gerald again. I never went back to that house. I never sent another dollar. Gerald lost the house 18 months later because it turns out his finances had been held together by my monthly payments and the fiction of independence. He moved into a rental apartment in a part of town he used to call rough, and he spent the next 15 years telling anyone who would listen that his oldest daughter was ungrateful and selfish and had turned her back on family over a misunderstanding. Lorraine stopped calling after a year, not because she accepted my decision, because she got tired of hearing no. Douglas left her eventually. Turns out a man who smiles too much and sells cars has secrets of his own. But that's Lorraine's story to tell, not mine. My mother, Dolly, called me once about 6 months after the birthday party. She didn't apologize. She said, You know your father doesn't mean harm, Margaret. He just doesn't know how to love differently. I said, That's not my problem to solve, Mum. She cried softly. Then she said, Will you at least send a photo of Ruby? I mailed one. Just one. Ruby in her yellow dress, laughing, holding the rabbit. I wrote on the back, Her name is Ruby Cole. She is my daughter. That's all there is to know. I don't know if Dolly showed it to Gerald. I don't know if he saw her laughing face and felt something, or if he looked at it and saw a stranger. I stopped wondering because wondering about Gerald's feelings had already cost me 32 years and $50,400, And I wasn't spending one more cent. Gerald died in 2013 in that rented apartment. A cousin called to tell me. She expected me to cry or rush to make arrangements. I said, "Thank you for letting me know." Then I hung up and made dinner. Lorraine handled the funeral. I didn't go. Some people told me I'd regret it. I'm 78. I haven't regretted it once. You can't mourn a relationship that was never what it pretended to be. You can only acknowledge that it existed and let it rest. Ruby is 53 now. She teaches fourth grade in a school 2 towns over. She has two daughters, Lily and May, who are 19 and 16. They call me Nana and fight over who gets to sit in my recliner when they visit. Ruby still writes poems. She published a small collection 3 years ago. Local press. Nothing fancy. The dedication page says, "For Mum, who told me my words were love when someone else called them fake." I keep that book on my nightstand. I read the dedication every night before I turn off the lamp. William died 6 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, in our bed, in the house we paid off together. He went the way he lived, without drama, without demanding attention, without making anyone else carry his weight. I miss him the way you miss the ground when you're falling. Constantly, invisibly, in every step. And the card, Ruby's card, the one Gerald snatched and tossed on the coffee table next to the mixed nuts. I still have it. It's in my nightstand drawer, right next to William's watch, and a photo of Ruby on the day the adoption was finalized. The crayon has faded. The construction paper is soft from being held, but the words are still there. I didn't have a grandpa before, but now I do. She was wrong about Gerald, but she was right about the feeling. She wanted family. She found it. It just wasn't in the room she expected. So here's what I want to ask you. And I mean this because I'm 78 and I've used up most of my patience for rhetorical questions. Was I right to walk away from my father and never look back? Was I right to cancel the money and close the door and skip the funeral of a man who told my daughter she should have been kept wherever they found her? Or should I have given him another chance? Should I have let time soften it? Should I have been the bigger person one more time? Tell me in the comments. Be honest. Be loud. Disagree with me if you want. I've survived worse than a comment section. And if this story reminded you of someone in your life, a child who wasn't chosen, a parent who wasn't brave enough, a door that needed closing, send it to them. Share it, because some stories don't just need to be told. They need to be heard by the exact right person at the exact right time. And if you've watched this far, and I know you have because you're still here, and that tells me everything I need to know about who you are, hit that subscribe button. Not for me. I'm 78. I don't need numbers. Hit it for the rubies. For the kids sitting in county offices with stuffed animals that have missing ears waiting for someone to say, "You're staying." This channel is their corner of the internet. And so are you. I'll see you in the next one. And trust me, the next story kept me awake 3 nights in a row because some families, I swear, some families make Gerald look like a greeting card. Take care of yourselves. Hold your children tight. And if anyone ever tells your kid they don't belong, you stand up. You stand up and you say something because silence in that moment isn't peace, it's permission. This is Margaret. Good night.